on! Let's go! 307! Come on! Yes! Come on, baby! Come on, baby! Yes! Come on!
It's been over 2.5 years since we last took a look at the world record history of Red Ball speedruns. In Red Ball World Record Progression, we watched the game evolve from casual playthroughs to Rare EG's 307, an insanely dominant record that many believed would stand for years to come. However, after this video received an unexpected swarm of attention in early 2021, hundreds of new runners flocked to the community with aspirations of speedrunning the game at a high level. Many people focused on mastering sub-20 train, a strategy in the penultimate level that saved around 8 seconds, but was thought to be unviable for full game runs. However, through an incredible amount of practice, some people built up enough consistency to justify going for it, even with the odds stacked against them. These attempts raged on for months, and on Rare EG's 23rd attempt at the strategy on world record pace, he finally pulled it off, allowing him to destroy the previous record with a 304.290. Along with this new wave of activity, there came many people who were more focused on the technical side of things. The game's mechanics were becoming much better understood, as we discovered and solved a peculiar death warp strategy in level 4 that saved a couple seconds. With these two strategies, the possibility of pushing the 12 levels world record under 3 minutes became more than a distant pipe dream. And on May 17th, 2021, Carmel pulled off a 257.806, shattering this legendary final minute barrier in decisive fashion. At this point, the possibility of getting a time under 2 minutes and 50 seconds seemed extremely far-fetched, as Carmel only had a few seconds of mistakes in his whole run. To break another barrier, some strategies with dreadfully low odds would need to be implemented to even make it a possibility. However, what if I told you that, since then, Red Ball speedrunning has gone through more history and development than everything that came before? What if I told you that the number of frame-perfect inputs present in the game's individual level records has skyrocketed from just a few to over 170? What if I told you that someone created a 2-hour-long scripted video covering the world record history of just the train level? In this 2-part extension of Red Ball's world record progression, we will cover how runners managed to travel far beyond the game's legendary 3-minute milestone toward a new quest for absolute perfection. And all of it was kickstarted by one crucial tool: the Red Ball task hack. Indeed, back when the first sub-3 was set in Red Ball, the game was completely missing the ability to program inputs frame by frame to craft theoretically optimal completions of each level, something that is crucial in the development of almost any speed game. Existing Flash game emulators that could allow for tasking just didn't support Red Ball yet. And the rudimentary save state and input playback mods that I had created just didn't provide the tools necessary to find new discoveries. Thankfully, one of the new members named Sage decided to start modding the game to a much greater extent, utilizing the source code provided by the game's creator to make all sorts of useful tools, including a rudimentary task hack. Over time, more developers would contribute to adding tons of different features, including save states, frame advance and rewind, a game data display, a way to import, export, and replay input sequences, a hitbox view, camera controls, an input brute forcer, and much, much more. The capabilities that this thing has far surpasses anything that we could have achieved through more traditional means of tasking. But back in this tool's infancy, there were still serious doubts that it would be useful in finding replicable setups for inconsistent strategies like Task 3, 6-ramp double jump, and sub-20 train. Back on April 10th, 2021, Not Very Good, Roblox 8192, Purple Juice Box, and Insane Jetman authored a task for the game that clocked in at 230.032, over 25 seconds ahead of the world record. It included plenty of inventive strategies that had yet to be performed in a real-time setting, including a huge corner jump in level 6 that was inspired by an insane segment that Zach, yes, that Zach, had accidentally pulled off during a full game run. There was also a new route in level 7, a crazy fast cycle skip and car launch in level 8, an insane ending in level 9, and much more. However, the completion for each level was crafted with a plethora of frame-perfect inputs that were generally brute-forced through trial and error. In terms of real-time strategies, there was almost nothing new. However, while I was completing my video covering Carmel's first sub 3 in Red Ball, things started to develop rapidly. On June 6th, Bird Banana used the task hack to discover an incredible strategy in level 3 that saved nearly as much time as the extremely inconsistent task 3, which had a success rate of about 1 in 20. With a frame-perfect jump at the start of the level, and another frame-perfect jump on the platform as it recoils, Red Ball will get launched high into the air. By jumping on the right side of the platform after falling, Red Ball gets enough height to clear the ground from the right side and reach the flag. Since the same sequence of inputs will always yield the same result, aside from a small caveat that we will get to later, the strategy was pretty easy to replicate when playing the game at full speed, especially given that the two frame-perfect inputs had distinct visual cues. The strategy was coined Bird 3, and if it could be paired with the wildly inconsistent sub 15 train strategy, getting a sub 250 was no longer out of the question. But hold on, people were still struggling immensely to hit the traditional sub 20 train in a run with any semblance of consistency. Sub 15 train, XDXbox Jaja, and Insane Jetman were the only runners to have ever hit it in any setting. For the time being, finding some kind of setup for sub 20 train was considered to be the holy grail, as it would make it significantly easier for other runners to join Carmel in the sub 3-minute club. And on the same day that Bird Banana discovered Bird 3, he cooked something up. A deterministic setup for sub 20 train requiring just 3 frame-perfect inputs. However, there was a massive problem. Even after a good amount of practice, people just found it to be less consistent than the traditional approach. Unfortunately, the slow-moving train made finding visual cues for the 3 inputs almost impossible, and it was very difficult to tell what went wrong on each failed attempt. For the time being, runners stuck to doing sub 20 train as they always had. On June 9th, Jonas Gaming, one of the other runners who was in the race for the first sub 3, was still doing attempts to try and beat Carmel's record. After incorporating Bird 3, he got a run that was on 254 pace going into level 10. After taking his first jump, the inconsistent spike pit got the best of him. Over 3 seconds lost from what is effectively RNG. However, after nailing sub 20 train, he was still barely on pace for a sub 3. Sadly, he came up just short, and a run that could have easily been a 256 ended as a 300.097, missing sub 3 by just 4 frames. Another runner that was continuing to go for their own sub 3 was XDXbox Jaja, who was possibly the most consistent runner at sub 20 train. He got onto a run with a best possible time of 251 going into level 11, but he opted to not go for either sub 20 or sub 15 train, ending with a 304.548. So, almost a month after Carmel set the first sub 3, none of the other contenders in the race had managed to pull it off, even with the enormous boon that Bird 3 was. Thankfully, one day later, another trademark inconsistency was defeated, as I discovered a setup for the double jump off of the ramp at the start of level 6, which previously had less than a 1 in 4 success rate and was essentially required for a sub 3. This setup, which I also found with the task hack, required 2 frame-perfect releases right at the start of the level and a frame-perfect jump on the ramp. This wasn't great, but the good news was that it could quickly be retried if failed. The strategy was coined Max 6, and it carried the level from being one of the most inconsistent in the entire run to one of the most consistent, opening the door for a sub 250 a little more. Unfortunately, Max 6 did have a small issue that made it less accessible for some runners. Since you had to perform the 2 key releases on frames 7 and 8 after loading the level respectively, if you had a reaction time that was above roughly 220 milliseconds, you could not pull off the strategy on the first go. Thankfully, you could still attempt it off a reset, but this loses a bit of time and it is harder to perform since you can't buffer inputs across a reset like you can over a level transition. Fortunately, I had the reaction speed necessary to incorporate the strategy to its fullest potential. With Bird 3 and Max 6 at my disposal, I finally found the motivation to start doing some runs. At this point, my 12 levels PB of 311.323 was leagues behind Carmel's world record, nearly placing me out of the top 10 on the leaderboard. I felt extremely washed up and thought that it would be a good idea to get a sub 310, the barrier that I had previously failed to shatter, before leaving the category behind for good. I got onto a run that botched Max 6, the ending of level 9, and the start of level 10. My best possible time going into level 11 was a 310.8. This wasn't going to be it. Unless...
I'm going for sub 20.
Wait, you don't have saw blade skip. Do you not have saw blade skip? Go for saw blade skip.
Are you actually?
Oh! Oh my god, please! Oh! Oh my god, get the fucking track! No!
This is so.
Wait, what happened?
He died despite.
So Johnny,
He got sub 20. Holy shit, bro.
Oh my god!
306.419. The culmination of utter chaos. To provide some more context for why I absolutely lost my mind at this moment, I had not even attempted a sub 20 train in practice for several months before this run, and I had only hit it a handful of times ever. I had never gone for it in a full run, and yet, on my first try, attempting it largely as a joke, I had gotten it. By pure dumb luck, I had gone from washed up to on pace for a top 3 time. Unfortunately, the spike monster struck again in level 12, and I ended up securing 6th place. Still, this experience was unbelievable, and it had come just 2 days before I premiered the sub 3 video. With that upload, I launched a $200 raffle that people could enter by improving their 12 levels PB by a certain amount, funded by a generous donation from Eugene. This further ignited some interest in running the game, but that spark would turn into an absolute inferno the next day. Peanuts discovered an amendment to Bird Banana's sub 20 train setup that only required a frame-perfect right press, a frame-perfect jump, and a 2-frame left tap. Additionally, the visual cues for the 2-frame perfects were way more distinct, and it even saved a second over the previous setup. Given the trend of naming frame-dependent setups after the player who found it, I coined the strategy P-Bird, since it was a joint effort by Peanuts and Bird Banana. Look, it was better than calling it Bird Nuts, and the name was quickly shortened to P-Bird to make it a bit less ridiculous. Tons of runners instantly started practicing the strategy in the task hack, using save states to quickly dish out attempts and analyzing the input string to determine the cause of each failure. In just 2 weeks, the 3 most inconsistent strategies in the entire run had all received deterministic, frame-dependent setups that made them wildly more consistent. P-Bird was the last motivation that I needed to attempt to get a sub 3 on my own before finally hanging up my hat. And it didn't take long before I got something going. On day 1, I already had a run on 257 pace going into level 11, but I ended up failing P-Bird. I also became the first to hit the setup in a run that should have been a small PB, but level 12 again had other plans. The next day, I started another stream that drew my largest live audience ever. People wanted to see all the new strategies pulled off in a world record, and I was playing the game better than I ever had. I got P-Bird again on a bad run, entered level 12 on 302 pace, and then messed up on the stairs, choking a top 3 spot for the second time. But the stream continued, and for one of the runs, Nifsky, Miniland, and Lakuki, 3 of the best Super Mario Bros. Speedrunners, were all watching at the same time. On this run, I nailed Bird 3 and Max 6 on my first try, only making one notable mistake before entering level 8. Now, I'll just let the rest of the run speak for itself.
No way, dude. Thought for sure it was over. Oh my gosh, dude. It's not real, dude. It's not real. It's not real, dude. It's not real, dude. I'm actually gonna pass out. I'm gonna pass out. I'm literally gonna pass out. My hands are tingling, dude. I literally almost. I swear to God, I was this close to passing out. And they're still tingling, dude. My hands are still tingling. I swear to God, this is the weirdest feeling on the planet. They're like shaking, bro. The tingle just won't go away. Oh my gosh. This would have never happened if P-Bird 11 wasn't found. It never would have happened. I would have stopped at 306 and that would have been it. I would have stopped.
255.484. This was not supposed to happen. Just a few days prior, my PB was a 311, and I would have been satisfied improving that time by just 2 seconds before leaving the category for good. But a perfect storm of new setups and personal discovery led to the most legendary moment of my speedrunning career. The start of the run was good, but that insane hood launch in level 8 and an almost perfect plunger jump in level 9 made it my best pace ever by a mile. But instead of choking, I had the most clutch ending of my life. I nailed the super jump and the ball boost in level 10, I hit P-Bird again to go 4 and 7 in runs, and I didn't die in that pesky spike pit or mess up the stairs in level 12. It was my perfect speedrun. There was still a bit of room for improvement, but I was content ending my journey with Red Ball 1 speedrunning here, especially given how unlikely it would be for more crazy setups to be found after this initial revolution. 2 days prior, I was simply illustrating a huge piece of Red Ball's incredible speedrunning history, but now I was the one writing it. And, of course, I did exempt myself from my own raffle for obvious reasons. Though I didn't think the game had many more breakthroughs in store, Bird Banana and Not Very Good had indeed found a setup for Resetless 4 back on June 10th, which was previously an IL-only strategy. Instead of resetting at the flag to change the position of the axe, giving plenty of time to perform the death warp, it was possible to get up the stairs fast enough to hit the death warp spot a cycle early. This saved around 1.5 seconds, but nobody was attempting it in runs due to it being wildly inconsistent. The setup was much better, but it unfortunately required 3 frame-perfect inputs, which made it not worth going for yet. Now, taking a slight detour for a moment, I'd like to mention the 120 levels category that was established on the Red Ball category extensions leaderboard earlier that year. As you probably guessed, this involved completing 10 consecutive 12 levels runs back to back, heavily inspired by the 11 times any percent category in Super Mario Bros. Because of how short the game is, a longer category like this demanded an even greater level of consistency during head-to-head races. People would sometimes joke about attempting a 1200 levels run, involving 112 levels runs back to back, but nobody was seriously considering it, given that it would require over 6 hours of focused gameplay while listening to the same 2-minute long song over and over again. At least, that's what we all thought. Over 6 hours and 45 minutes into his 1200 levels run, XDXbox Jaja entered level 11 for the 100th time of the stream. Earlier, he had decided that he was going to go for sub 15 train on his final completion, obviously not expecting anything to come from it. At this point, his energy was completely drained, and he wanted nothing more than to just get the run over with. Sure, XDXbox Jaja was the expert of sub 15 train, but there was just no way that the stars would align at this moment for such a wildly inconsistent strategy. XDXbox Jaja was previously the first person to get sub 20 train in a run, but now he was also the first to get sub 15 train in a run under some of the craziest circumstances imaginable. Xbox closed out his run with a 646.03, founding a meme category that only 3 other people have dared to attempt in the years since. Shifting gears, it would be almost an entire month before a third player would pull off a sub 3, that runner being Yak27. However, on Speedrun.com, the submission was filed under the name Sweden. Take a wild guess which country he's from. At the same time, Carmel was still pouring in attempts to try to take his record back. Carmel hadn't yet incorporated the Resetless 4 setup, but he did utilize a corner boost strategy which saved almost as much time. A week before Yak sub 3, he entered level 11 on world record pace for his 10th time. However, this run was so good that he could have scored himself a high 250 with an ideal ending. Sadly, he missed the frame perfect jump during P-Bird, forcing him to complete the level normally. Thus, without sub 20 train, a strategy that saved around 8 seconds, Carmel still scored another sub 3. By almost any metric, Carmel was a substantially better Red Ball player than I was, but we were opposites in the luck we had experienced with that one level. Unfortunately, Carmel's misfortune would continue, as his failed sub 20 train count continued to rise. P-Bird just wasn't his thing, and he even decided to revert to the old sub 20 train approach for some runs to just try to gain some control, but it still wasn't working out. A few more weeks passed, and Carmel's failed sub 20 train count on record pace had risen to 18, including 2 runs that had gotten past the strategy, but then died in the spike pit in level 12. On a run that was almost a carbon copy of mine, aside from slightly better execution in levels 7 and 10, Carmel got ready to give P-Bird another go. He got past the spike pit, but this time, it was the stairs that attempted to kill another one of his runs. However, after a retime, the run was confirmed to be a 255.452, beating my record by just a single frame. Following in line with Yak, Carmel had changed his name to be Poland over on Speedrun.com, meaning that 2 of the top 3 spots were now occupied by the entire might of some European countries. This run could have easily been a low 253 without the small mistake at the end, which would have placed it near the theoretical cap of 252 that was proposed in my sub 3 video. However, by this point, it was apparent that a sub 250 was going to happen at some point. Carmel had already been on high 250 pace in the past, and with a perfect run, it was certainly possible to achieve, even without incorporating any new strategies. Within the next month, 2 newer runners, Big Muck Muck and Odia Gretsum, became the 4th and 5th players to claim a sub 3. Odiag's run was actually on world record pace by a frame or 2 going into level 12, but that pesky spike pit dealt him another fatal blow. A day later, Pogwin became the 6th to get a sub 3, and since he and Odiag both went by their country's names on Speedrun.com, Lithuania and Brazil respectively, I was now surrounded on all fronts by 4 entire countries. It wasn't looking good for me. 4 days after that, Yak claimed the record with a 254.645, finally utilizing the Resetless 4 setup to save a bit of time over Carmel. It had become much easier to practice thanks to Sage developing what is known as the frame offset hack. This practice hack allowed the player to paste in a pre-made string that defined the frame-perfect inputs and releases that were necessary for the setup. The bars on the bottom left provided a visual for how early or late each input was, with perfect inputs being in the middle, early inputs being on the left, and late inputs being on the right. The community would create a database of these input strings, eventually giving players multiple options for strategies to attempt in each level. However, a week after Yak's record, Carmel was still going for the corner boost approach in level 4, and despite losing 2 seconds after messing it up, he still snapped back with a 253.548. Competition simmered down again after this, but in October, Bird Banana cooked up yet another frame-dependent setup, and this time it was larger than anything that had come before. Previously, Bird Banana had found a setup for level 10 that required a single frame perfect input and avoided resetting at this flag to make the cycles more favorable. However, since it only saved around a second, it was not worth going for in runs. In contrast, this new setup saved over 4 seconds. Yes, it did require 4 frame perfect inputs, but they were all with the same key, and they had a bit of a rhythm. 3 days later, I affirmed its viability by nailing the full thing in an individual level setting. With this, getting a sub 250 no longer required a perfect run. It was more attainable than ever, and with the floodgates open, Carmel, me, and Pogwin all started doing attempts to shatter what we all thought to be Red Ball's final barrier. For real this time. Unfortunately, we all struggled immensely when it came to executing the strategy in a full game run. It wasn't until November 1st that Carmel finally became the first to do it, which placed him on 251 pace before he failed P-Bird. However, on the same day that mental barrier was torn down, the community was faced with its most important decision yet. Should the randomness of Spike Glitch be removed? Let's take a massive step back to understand why this was even being considered in the first place. If you have watched my Red Ball Task Explained video, then you are probably aware that Spike Glitch, the oversight that makes it possible to jump into spikes without dying, is dependent on a variety of factors that are largely outside of the player's control. By pausing and unpausing the game, individual spikes are only able to kill the player if they overlap themselves for 2 consecutive frames. The collision check is performed between some test points on Red Ball's circumference and the rendered pixels of the spike. And because of anti-aliasing, Spike Glitch is more effective the higher the resolution of the game. This made Spike Glitch way more consistent for people playing in full screen on 1080p monitors compared to those needing to play the game at its default resolution of 550 by 400 out of performance concerns, like XT-Xbox Jaja. Indeed, Flash is so badly optimized that even a simple game like Red Ball can have significant performance issues on lower end machines. And as it turned out, those performance issues could prove even more fatal than reducing the resolution due to the second factor that controlled Spike Glitch: varying frame times. You see, Flash is not consistently able to render each frame in perfect intervals. Red Ball's frame rate of 31 yields an intended frame time of 32.258 milliseconds. But you can have some frames last a good bit more or less than this, especially on lower end machines. Because the function that is supposed to smoothly pan the camera is based on real time, having faster frames followed up by slower frames causes visible jerkiness on the screen. If you look hard enough at almost any recording of the game shown thus far, you'll be able to notice this clear as day. For Spike Glitch, this jerkiness has a devastating side effect. If the screen doesn't pan by as much as it should in a given frame, it greatly increases the likelihood that a spike will overlap itself for 2 consecutive frames, possibly causing Red Ball to die. Therefore, the randomness behind Spike Glitch wasn't even RNG in the traditional sense, since there wasn't any actual randomness programmed into the game. Instead, it was entirely reliant on system factors outside of the game's sandbox, including operating system, hardware scheduling, process priority, computer specs, and several other things that are basically impossible to control. However, the overall trend was clear. People with slower computers were at a significant disadvantage when it came to Spike Glitch due to having more inconsistent frame times. But you don't just have to take my word for it. Here is the same input sequence in level 9 being replayed on my computer versus my slower laptop. As you can see, the difference is astonishing. Because of how much of a nuisance this was when making tasks of the game, a solution had already been found and implemented in the task hack to make Spike Glitch completely deterministic. All it took was this one-line code change to the tweener, making it scroll based off the intended frame time rather than the actual frame time. As a much welcomed side effect, this also completely removed the jerkiness from the camera view, which previously limited some people's ability to play the game for long periods due to causing them eye strain. Armed with all of this knowledge, the community had to decide whether a modified version of the game with this one change would be allowed for real-time speedruns. Tallying the votes from over 100 Red Ball speedrunners, 89.6% of them voted in favor of allowing the deterministic patch, and it was allowed in runs starting on November 5th. A variable was created on the game's Speedrun.com page to differentiate runs performed on the deterministic patch versus the standard version. While the main purpose of the patch was to level the game's playing field, it did have the notable side effect of making Spike Glitch way more consistent. As long as you had enough speed to make the spikes not overlap before jumping in, you were essentially invincible. While most people welcomed this, Carmel strayed from the pack and decided that he wanted to get a sub 250 on his terms, without the deterministic patch. And it wouldn't take him long to get some more insane paces. Attempting resetless 10 for the 14th time on easy sub 250 pace, he unfortunately mistimed one of the frame perfects and had to settle for doing a backup strategy, which ended up being just as fast as the usual method thanks to a very clean ending. Staying composed, he nailed P-Bird and survived the spike pit in level 12 despite playing on the standard version, ending with a new record of 253.226. Almost a month after people had started attempting resetless 10 and runs, not a single person had hit the strategy on sub 250 pace, speaking volumes to its difficulty. The next day, Norxor was streaming attempts in hopes of getting his first sub 3. He got onto a run that was pretty lackluster out of level 9, but with resetless 10 in his back pocket, he still had a chance of pulling it off. Much to his shock, he got it. Sure, he still had P-Bird ahead, but if he was able to close out his first sub 3 in this manner, it would certainly be one for the history books. Well, after Nor's legendary choke, I started a stream going for sub 250 with resetless 10. And after putting together a run that had Bird 3, resetless 4, and max 6, I finally became the first person to hit it on 2.4x pace. It was time to clutch up once again.
Game face on. What happened? What? Dude, are you kidding me? Give me a break, man. Dude, no. All right, come on. Let's get record. What a drag, dude. Dang it, I never messed that up. Literally never messed that up. Real one.
Tragically, I jumped slightly late after landing on this slope, which threw off my ending. And due to the game's flawed method of determining whether Red Ball can jump or not, I didn't get a jump after landing on the ground here. I could have still gotten the record, but I messed up P-Bird anyway. What a letdown. However, the keen-eyed among you may have noticed that the camera was jerking a lot during that footage. I wasn't playing on deterministic patch. However, unlike Carmel, this wasn't intentional. I thought that I was. During that week of attempts, I was dying to spikes a lot more than I should have. But I assured myself that I was probably just hitting some unlucky input sequences that always yielded a death. I was so used to the game's jerkiness back in the day that it just didn't register with my brain that anything was off. It wasn't until I reviewed this footage while researching for this video that I noticed my catastrophic mistake. If I was just playing on the right version of the game, I would have likely gotten more paces into the late game that could have resulted in a new world record, or even the first sub 250. Oh, what could have been. But that didn't change the fact that Carmel was accomplishing much more than I was, despite having the same limitation. 3 days later, he finally hit resetless 10 on sub 250 pace without screwing up the ending too badly, and geared up for an attempt at P-Bird. Sadly, it didn't go his way, and he ended with a 258 without sub 20 train. 9 days later, he got it on pace for the second time, and came up with an entirely new way of snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. Welcome to the club, Carmel. Welcome to the club. The run was still world record pace going into the train, but P-Bird did him dirty yet again. However, he quickly picked himself back up, and that same day, he started a run with blisteringly fast pace. Well, he jumped a frame late at the start of level 10, and the recovery efforts were quite slow. That was probably curtains. But hold on a second, his best possible time still showed a 249. Well, his sum of best at the time was compiled from his best individual level times, meaning that it included his level 11 PB of 15.387 seconds, or 18.21 seconds with the transition. Since he had never hit a train like that in a run, Carmel smartly opted to just go for P-Bird in hopes of achieving a new record. And that decision paid off. 252.484. At this point, Carmel was becoming much better versed with resetless 10, often able to pull it off multiple times in a row during practice. As I shifted my focus to completing my Red Ball 2 world record progression video, my sub 250 attempts came to a screeching halt, leaving Carmel as the clear favorite to be the one to pull it off. He kept grinding away, and on the 1st of December, he hit resetless 10 for the second time on sub 250 pace. He lost almost 2 seconds after getting screwed over by the slope at the end, but it was still barely fast enough. Unfortunately, the curse of P-Bird struck yet again. December 3rd, Carmel misses the corner boost in level 4, but he maintains a solid pace for the rest of the run and hits resetless 10. He almost pulls a Nor at the end, but it only ends up costing him a second. 249 is still possible with P-Bird, but just barely.
What the fuck? Come on, what's that? Oh no! I can't believe I missed the P-Bird. The stupidest way to it.
Unreal. With Carmel taking longer than expected to pull off the sub 250, other runners started catching up to him, poised to claim the first 24X for themselves at a moment's notice. The entire country of Lithuania, represented by Pogwin, claimed a 251.226 on December 9th. The difference between this run being a simple PB and shattering the game's final barrier was essentially just this awkward transition between levels 8 and 9, which lost over a second. Pogwin didn't hit resetless 4 either, which could have also put it over the mark. 4 days later, the entire country of Sweden, represented by Yak27, claimed a
251.
251, yeah.
Good job.
252.129, which meant that the whole top 3 was now occupied by European countries. Whether this was a sign of unity or intra-continental warfare is up to your interpretation, but regardless, it was certainly a sight to behold. While Carmel was sticking to his guns with playing the stock version of the game, both Yak and Pogwin had made the switch to the deterministic patch long ago, which certainly gave them a slight boost in consistency with the levels that required Spike Glitch, namely 7, 9, 10, and 12. Carmel hadn't yet had a run die to level 12's infamous Spike Pit, but it was certainly a possibility. As he continued to rack up more and more sub 250 paces into the train, Carmel was poised to make it to this final obstacle any day now. By December 19th, he was seeking an 11th attempt at level 11.
I'm so scared. What the fuck?
Barring a catastrophe on the stairs, this would have almost certainly been the first sub 250 if Carmel was playing on deterministic patch. But he wasn't, and his doomsday scenario had come to fruition. He knew that this was the largest risk in sticking with the original version, and he had already accepted that. So, despite his greatest opportunity crumbling before his eyes, he pressed on with his original goal. December 21st, he nailed the 2-frame perfects of P-Bird on an easy sub 250 pace, but that 2-frame left tap got the best of him. 1 day later, The video of this run unfortunately hasn't survived, but Pogwin killed a sub 250 to the saw in level 12. Normally, the cycle lines up in a way that makes it easy to avoid without slowing down. But with the immense nerves that Pogwin was facing, this extremely unlikely fail had made an appearance. By December 30th, Carmel had entered the train 31 times on pace, and he still hadn't closed out a sub 250. P-Bird was Carmel's kryptonite, and the number of failures was seriously starting to drain him. Meanwhile, the opposing forces were further closing in, as the same day, that country next to Norway was barely on sub 250 pace going into level 12. However, Yak's best possible time included an extremely risky approach to the spikes that saved just a fraction of a second. Even on deterministic patch, the success rate was very low, and Yak unfortunately messed up the setup. Another chance shattered to pieces. The next day, he got a 251.419 with a failed resetless 10. The Bob Army was stronger than ever, including support from longtime Super Mario 63 world record holder Verdict. The apparent certainty of Carmel being the first to pull off sub 250 had all but vanished. Rolling into the new year, it was a dead heat between Carmel of Poland, Yak27 of Sweden, and Pogwin of Lithuania. And on January 3rd, 2022, it all came to a head. Yak27 finally pulled off the first sub 250 in convincing fashion. Though he hit max 6 on his second try and had a bad hood launch in level 8, everything else in the run was essentially perfect for the strategies he was going for. Many familiar runners shared their congratulations in the comments, including Xbox, Verdict, DHA, and even Nifsky, who had been following the community for quite a while at this point. Unfortunately for Carmel, sticking to his guns hadn't won him the war. But 2 days later, he finally got a win, as he claimed a new record of 247.6 on the standard version of the game. There was just one slight problem. Carmel truly could not catch a break. He had finally accomplished his goal of getting a sub 250 without the deterministic patch, but he was the only one who had seen it happen. It wouldn't make an appearance on the leaderboard, but given that his goal was mainly a personal objective, he felt content with continuing his future attempts on the deterministic patch. With the pressure simmering and his consistency being higher than ever, Carmel finally got a recorded sub 250 on January 11th, clocking in at a 248.645. He didn't have the verified record, but he still felt satisfied enough to retire from Red Ball speedrunning for good. At this point, the community's individual level sum of best was in the low 230s, but there wasn't a single runner who had a sum of best under 240 from segments performed in actual runs. After hours and hours of practice and attempts, people could pull off insane setups on individual levels with tons of frame perfects to far surpass the traditional movement records of old. However, in a full game setting, where attempts are much longer and nerves are way higher, the 4 frame perfects in Resetless 10 were about the best that people could manage. At the time, there was no path to a sub 240, and most levels were still played traditionally, without any frame dependent setups, including levels 1, 2, 5, 7, 8, 9, and 12. If people wanted to push the game further, the approach to at least some of these levels was going to have to change considerably. Well, let's just say that this video only covers half of the game's history after Carmel's Sub 3. In the final volume, Red Ball Speedruns, The Quest for Perfection, we are going to examine how revolutionary frame-dependent setups gave dedicated speedrunners the tools needed to continue writing this game's world record history. If you thought that the events shared through this video were crazy, I can promise you that what's coming next is even more insane. So, subscribe if you want to continue following along. I hope to see you all back again soon.